When everything is stripped away, love, trust, identity, what remains is the truth of who you really are. This story explores the emotional collapse of betrayal and the quiet rebuilding that follows. As she uncovers the hidden reality of her past, her pain transforms into clarity. It's not just about revenge, but about rediscovering self-worth, proving that even the deepest wounds can become the foundation of strength.
Preston Carter walked into the most exclusive diamond gala in New York City, his 26-year-old mistress clinging to his arm. He had a smug look on his face that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Back at their large home, he had left his pregnant wife with a cruel insult. He called her a whale and ordered her to dust the library, telling her not to bother waiting up. He had absolutely no idea the $5,000 ticket in his pocket was not a lucky break. It was bait in a carefully set trap. He was completely unaware that every dollar in his bank account, every business deal he celebrated, and every expensive suit on his back came from a single person. That person was the woman he had just abandoned, who was now crying over a cold Thanksgiving meal. She was the woman whose pregnant belly he had never once touched. She was the woman he had convinced was utterly worthless. But this is the secret Preston did not know. His quiet, overlooked, and supposedly broken wife owned the very hotel he was standing in. She also owned the bank that held his mortgage. In fact, she owned his entire company through 12 different secret corporations. And tonight, in front of 500 of the most powerful people in America, she was about to step out of the shadows. She would be wearing a $12 million sapphire necklace, ready to burn his whole world to the ground. But this story is about more than just revenge. The real challenge began after the gala. The public turned against her. His lawyer tried to take her baby from her, and then, at 3 a.m, Preston himself showed up on her doorstep. This story will make you question everything you thought you knew about silence, strength, and survival. It proves that the most formidable woman in any room is not the one making a lot of noise. It is the one who has been quiet for 5 years and has finally decided she is done pretending. Before we go any further, let me explain what this story is really about. It is not about money or getting even. It is about a woman who was told she was nothing for 5 long years. She started to believe it until one day she stopped. If you have ever stayed too long with someone who made you feel small, or if you were ever too afraid to leave because you thought you had nothing, this story is meant for you. Your silence is not weakness. Your patience is not a character flaw, and your comeback does not require $1 billion. It only needs you to make one single choice. Preston Carter walked into the Diamond Gala. He had a woman on his arm who was not his wife and a look on his face that was brighter than the giant chandelier above them. He straightened his tuxedo, a custom piece that cost more than a year of rent for most people. He leaned over and whispered to the blonde woman beside him, "This is where big things happen, babe. Just stick with me and try to look like you belong." Tiffany Blake, who was 26 years old, was squeezed into a fake red designer dress. It was so tight it looked like it was painted right onto her skin. She let out a tiny squeal that made 3 wealthy women nearby jump. "Oh my goodness, Preston, is that the mayor?" That night, Preston Carter felt like he could do no wrong. He believed he had fought his way up from nothing to the very top of his field. He thought it was all because of his own genius and hard work. He believed the invitation in his pocket was proof that the world had finally recognized how great he was. He was completely wrong about everything. That invitation was not a reward. It was a leash. And the woman he left at home, 7 months pregnant, and crying over a holiday meal he skipped, she was not the weak person he imagined her to be. She was not the simple homemaker he had spent 5 years turning her into. The truth was, she owned the very hotel where he was standing. She owned the bank that held the loan on his house. She owned every single penny in his investment company, which was hidden behind a complicated maze of shell corporations. The setup was so complex it would take a team of top accountants 3 months to unravel it. And she had already hired that team, but before we get to the end, you need to understand his crime. Because what Preston Carter did to his pregnant wife was much worse than just cheating on her. It was more than just being mean. It was a quiet war he fought against a woman whose only mistake was wanting to be loved for who she was. And that woman, her name was Vivian. And tonight she was completely finished with pretending. To understand how Vivian Sinclair ended up scrubbing pots in a huge house in Connecticut while secretly running a global empire from a hidden phone in her laundry room, we need to go back 6 years. We need to go to a small diner in Dayton, Ohio. A 28-year-old woman sat all alone in a booth with torn seats, wearing her deceased father's flannel shirt. She was just staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her father, Henry Sinclair, had been buried the day before. To everyone in Dayton, Henry was just a mechanic, but he was a really good one. He was the kind of man who could tell what was wrong with a car just by listening to the engine. He would never charge a widow the full price for a repair job. He always had grease under his nails and a laugh that could fill the entire room. He raised Vivian all by himself after her mother died when Vivian was only 12. What the people of Dayton did not know was that Henry Sinclair had also invented a special fuel part back in the late 1970s. It completely changed the way car engines worked. He patented it without any fanfare and licensed it to dozens of companies. By the time he died of a heart attack at 61, that small part was inside nearly 60% of every engine in the world. Henry left Vivian an enormous amount of money. It was $4.3 billion, managed by a company called the Aurora Group. It was run by a man named Benedict Ashford, the chief executive officer of the biggest private bank in London. As Vivian sat in that diner the day after the funeral, her phone buzzed. It was the lawyer for her former fiancé. This was the man who had stolen $2 million from her personal account and then vanished to Costa Rica 6 months earlier. He disappeared right after he found out how much money she really had. The lawyer's voice was slick and sounded like he had practiced his speech. "Miss Sinclair," he said, "my client feels it would be best for everyone to avoid a messy legal fight. He suggests we settle this matter quietly." Vivian just hung up the phone. She did not say a single word. She looked at her reflection in the dark window of the diner. Rain was sliding down the glass, making her face look like a stranger's. She saw a woman who had been betrayed by the first man she had ever really loved. Her father was gone, her mother was just a faint memory, and her money had become a terrible burden. It made every new relationship feel like a business transaction. She picked up her phone and made a call to Benedict Ashford. "Benedict," she said. Her voice was perfectly calm, even though tears were still drying on her cheeks. "I want to disappear. Make a new identity for me. I will handle everything from a distance now. Vivian Sinclair is gone as of today." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "And who," Benedict finally asked, "will be born in her place, madam?" "Nobody," she answered. "Just an ordinary woman. She wanted to find a man who could love her without seeing a price tag attached. So that evening she made a call to her grandmother. Gloria Sinclair was 72 years old, with a mind as sharp as a needle and a tongue that was twice as direct. She still lived in the same house in Dayton, where she had raised Vivian's father, Henry. Gloria was the only other soul on earth who knew the full truth of what Vivian was about to do. "Grandma," Vivian started, "I am going to find someone who loves me for who I am when I have absolutely nothing. I am going to live like a normal person for a while and see if true love is even real." Gloria was silent for a few seconds. And then she said the words that Vivian would carry with her for the next 6 years, feeling their weight in her pocket like a heavy stone. "Baby," she said, "if you truly want to see a man's character, do not watch how he treats you when you are shining. Watch how he treats you when you are struggling. That is the only test that really matters." So Vivian packed her bags and moved to Westport, Connecticut. She found a small apartment for rent just above a little bakery. She got a job as a waitress in a restaurant that she actually owned, hidden behind 3 layers of corporations. She filled her closet with jeans from the clearance rack and drove an old Honda Civic that had a noticeable dent in the back bumper. And that is how she met Preston. He was charming. Good heavens, he was the most charming man she had ever met. He had this amazing way of looking at you, like you were the only person in the room, and like your every word was the most fascinating thing he had ever heard. He was a perfect gentleman. He always held the door open for her. He would pull her chair out for her at restaurants. He even remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk and just 1 single sugar. He would have one already waiting for her when she arrived at the little coffee shop where they had their second, third, and fourth dates. On their third date, as they were walking past a grocery store, an elderly woman ahead of them dropped two big paper bags. Groceries went everywhere. Cans rolled out into the street, and the poor woman looked like she was about to cry. Preston did not miss a beat. He jogged right over to her, gathered up every single can, and carried both of her heavy bags all the way to her car. When she tried to give him a $5 bill, he politely refused. He walked back over to Vivian with a little smile. "Sorry about that," he said. "I could not just leave her like that, you know?" And in that exact moment, Vivian fell completely in love. It was not just what he did, but how easily it came to him. It felt like kindness was just a part of his very nature. She would replay that moment in her mind, thousands of times over the next 5 years. She would try to understand how the man who helped a stranger with her groceries could become the man who told his own pregnant wife she looked like a whale. They were married 18 months later. Vivian told Preston that she had a small inheritance from her father, just enough for a down payment on a house. The truth was, she bought the entire house with cash using a shell company. Then she created a completely fake mortgage, so Preston would think he was paying for it himself with money from his new company, Carter Ventures. That company was his everything, his proof to the world that he was an important man. What Preston never knew was that every single client, every investor, and every big deal his company ever got was secretly funneled to him from her company, the Aurora Group. It all came through a complicated maze of shell companies with names like Nebula Holdings and Orion Acquisitions. Vivian was his only investor. She was his only client. She was his only source of income. She did all this not to control him, but because she loved him and wanted him to feel successful. She wanted him to have confidence. She wanted the man she married to feel like he was king of the world. She just never imagined he would get there by pushing her down into the dirt. A man does not become a monster overnight. It is a slow, quiet process. Abuse is not a sudden earthquake that shakes your world apart. It is a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. So gradually that you do not notice the canyon being carved out until you cannot even remember what the landscape looked like before. Their first year of marriage was a wonderful dream. Preston brought her a bouquet of flowers every single Friday, without fail. He cooked dinner for her every Sunday. He would call her "my girl," and when he said it, she felt it in her heart. In the beginning, that feeling was all that mattered. He would wrap his arms around her from behind while she was at the sink washing dishes, kiss her on the neck, and whisper, "How did I get to be so lucky?" In the second year, the first small crack appeared. They were getting ready to go to a dinner party when Vivian came downstairs in a new blue dress. Preston just stared at her for a long, silent moment, and a cold look passed through his eyes. He said, "You are wearing that? It is a bit plain, don't you think? You should wear something with more shape. You have been looking a little soft recently." She went back upstairs and she changed her dress. She told herself it was not a big deal. After all, couples give each other opinions. That is perfectly normal. It is even healthy. But by the third year, the opinions never stopped. He did not say please anymore. He stopped saying thank you. The Friday flowers and the Sunday dinners completely vanished. He started to call the house my house and the car my car, even though it was all paid for with Vivian's money. He would tell her, "You do not contribute anything around here, Vivian. You are a part-time waitress who just messes around the house all day. I am the one who is building a real future here. I have the vision. You should just be grateful that I let you stay." By the fourth year, his cruelty was no longer a surprise. It was just a part of him. He would come home late at night, smelling of expensive perfume that was not hers. When she would ask him where he had been, he would give her a look of such pure disgust that she felt like she was shrinking. "I was working, Vivian. I was working on things you could never possibly understand because you have never built anything important in your entire life. Now go make me something to eat. I am starving." She knew she could leave. At any moment, she could walk to the laundry room, pull the hidden, encrypted phone from the bottom of the hamper, and make one single call to her assistant, Benedict. Preston would be removed from her world. He would disappear with the clean and quiet efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. Vivian had the money, the lawyers, and all the power, but she also had hope, that foolish, stubborn, and wonderfully destructive thing. She kept waiting for the man she had fallen in love with to come back, the man who helped an old woman with her groceries, the man who used to call her my girl. She kept giving him one more chance, and then another, and then one more after that. Here is a secret that nobody ever tells you about relationships like this. The person who stays is never weak. Staying requires an incredible amount of strength. It is just the wrong kind of strength, a strength turned inward on yourself, slowly crushing your own spirit from the inside. The bravest thing Vivian Sinclair ever did was not building a billion-dollar company from nothing. It was waking up every morning next to a man who made her feel worthless and still finding the will to get out of bed. In the 5th year, he hired Tiffany Blake. Tiffany was 26 years old, blonde, and hungry for success. She had a communications degree from a state school and a special gift for telling powerful men exactly what they wanted to hear. Preston hired her to be his executive assistant. She started at Carter Ventures, and in less than 3 months, she was taking his personal calls, picking up his dry cleaning, and meeting him at a fancy hotel every Tuesday afternoon. He told Vivian he was in board meetings. Vivian knew everything, of course. She had access to every financial record, every single credit card bill, and every location log from his car's GPS. She watched the charges from the hotel show up on the company credit card. She saw the purchases from jewelry stores. She watched as a $12,500 diamond necklace from Cartier was logged into the company's accounting books as computer hardware. She watched it all unfold, and she felt her heart breaking in slow motion. It broke so slowly and so completely that when there was finally nothing left to break, she hardly even noticed the silence where love used to be. And then, 3 months into the affair, Vivian found out she was pregnant. She told Preston that night over dinner. She had cooked his favorite meal, set the table with candles, and put the ultrasound picture in a little envelope next to his plate. Preston opened it. He looked at the picture for a long time, and then he looked up at Vivian. For one bright, desperate moment, she saw a tiny spark of the man she had married in his eyes. "A baby," he said. His voice was soft. "A girl," Vivian whispered back. "We are going to have a daughter." Preston put the photo down on the table. He picked up his fork, took a bite of his food, and then, without even looking at her again, he said, "Well, I hope she gets your looks. My genes would be wasted on someone who is just going to end up a housewife anyway." He went upstairs right after he finished eating. He did not say another word about the baby for 3 weeks. But Vivian stayed at that table long after the candles had burned themselves out. With one hand on her stomach, she made a completely new kind of decision. She was no longer staying for Preston. She was no longer hoping for him. She was finished with hope. Now, she was planning. She picked up the encrypted phone from its hiding place and called Benedict. "The gala," she said. "When is the Diamond Gala this year?" "December 14th, madam. The invitations went out last week." "Send one to Preston," she said. "And make sure it looks like it came from the official committee. I want a VIP table for him, right up near the front." Benedict paused on the other end of the line. "And the board presentation, madam?" "Move the meeting to that same night," she said. "I want the complete financial investigation ready to go. Get Henderson, the legal team, I want all of them there." "Madam," Benedict said very carefully, "are you absolutely sure about this?" Vivian looked down at the ultrasound picture. It was still on the table next to Preston's uneaten dinner, and the melted wax from the candles. "I am sure," she said. "My daughter will not be born into a world built on lies." The weeks before the gala were supposed to be a countdown to her new life. Instead, they became the most difficult weeks Vivian had ever experienced. It all started on Thanksgiving. Vivian, 6 months pregnant, woke up at 5 in the morning. She spent the entire day preparing a huge meal. She roasted a turkey with sage stuffing, made cranberry sauce from scratch, and baked a green bean casserole. She even made a sweet potato pie from Preston's mother's own recipe. It was the one he had mentioned on their second date, the one he said always reminded him of his childhood. She set the table with their best dishes, lit some candles, and put on her nicest maternity dress. It was a soft green dress that made her feel almost pretty, despite the heavy feeling of her pregnancy and 5 years of being ignored. She even poured Preston's favorite bourbon into a glass with one large ice cube, exactly how he liked it. Preston finally walked in at 9:15 that night. By that time, the turkey was cold, the candles had burned down to stubs, and the ice cube had melted into a sad, watery mess. He came into the dining room, glanced at the huge meal she had cooked, and wrinkled his nose like something smelled bad. "I already ate," he announced. "The team took me to Nobu. You know I cannot eat all this heavy stuff, Vivian. It is so unsophisticated." Vivian's hands started to shake, but she kept her voice even. "I made your mother's sweet potato pie. You told me it was your favorite." Preston yanked his tie loose. "That was before I learned what good food tastes like, Vivian. Get rid of all this. And clean up. The whole house smells like a high school cafeteria." He walked up the stairs without even looking at her pregnant belly, without asking a single question about their baby, and without wishing her a happy Thanksgiving. Vivian sat down at the perfectly set, empty table. She picked up a fork and ate her Thanksgiving dinner all by herself as tears dripped onto the pie she had spent 3 hours making for him from memory. That night, she found it impossible to lie in the same bed with him. Instead, Vivian curled up on the living room couch and dialed her best friend, Ruth Washington. They had known each other since their first year of college. Ruth worked as a pediatric nurse in Bridgeport and had a reputation for speaking her mind without any sugarcoating. "Viv, you need to leave him tonight," Ruth insisted. "Just pack a bag and drive over to my place. I will get the guest room ready for you." "I am 7 months pregnant, Ruth. It is not that simple." "You have $1 billion, Vivian. You can do literally anything you want." "That is not what this is about," she whispered. "I needed this to be real. I wanted to know he loved me for me. If I tell him who I am now, I will lose the chance to ever really know." "Know what, exactly?" Ruth's voice was sharp with frustration. "He treats you like you are nothing. That is all you need to know. The test is done, Viv. And he failed. Please listen to me. When a person shows you their true colors, you have to believe them. You have already given him 5 years of second chances. This is not about love, honey. You are a hostage." Vivian squeezed her eyes shut. "Not right now. The big gala is in 2 weeks. I have a plan. After the gala, everything will be over." "I promise," Vivian said softly. Ruth was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice low and serious, "Vivian Sinclair, I swear on everything, if that man lays a hand on you or that baby, I will personally burn his entire world to ashes. And I do not need $1 billion to do it." A week before the gala, Vivian went to her last prenatal checkup. This was the final ultrasound before her daughter would be born. This child was created in a moment that Vivian desperately wanted to believe had meant something special. She had asked Preston to go with her. "I have a meeting," Preston had replied, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "A real one, with people who are actually important." So Vivian went alone. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson, conducted the ultrasound. The baby was perfectly healthy. She had a strong, steady heartbeat and was positioned just right. Everything on the monitor looked perfect, a stark contrast to how broken her own life felt. Then, Dr. Patterson's friendly expression shifted just a little. "Mrs. Carter, your blood pressure is a bit elevated. Have you been dealing with any unusual stress lately?" In that instant, something inside of Vivian finally snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, splintering crack, like a branch finally giving way to the weight of too much snow. She started to cry, and once she started, she could not stop. The tears just streamed down her face. She just sat there on the examination table, wearing a thin paper gown, with cold ultrasound gel still on her belly, and she sobbed. Dr. Patterson simply held her hand, waiting with quiet patience. After the worst of the tears had passed, the doctor asked in a gentle voice, "Vivian, I need to ask you a very important question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is everything all right at home?" Vivian opened her mouth, ready to let the truth spill out. The words were right on the tip of her tongue, aching to be spoken, but after 5 years of living a lie, staying silent was a deeply ingrained habit. "I am okay," she lied. It is just the pregnancy hormones. She left the clinic and walked through the rainy parking lot to her old, beat-up Honda Civic. And that is when she saw it. Preston's gleaming silver Mercedes was parked across the street, right in front of the Cheesecake Factory. She could see him clearly through the large window, bathed in the restaurant's warm lighting. He was sitting in a cozy booth with Tiffany Blake. Tiffany was laughing at something he had just said. Then, Preston reached across the table and delicately fed her a bite of cheesecake from his own fork. His hand then moved down, coming to rest on Tiffany's stomach. He rubbed it with a gentle tenderness, the exact way a man touches the woman who is carrying his child. Tiffany was also pregnant. Vivian stood frozen in the pouring rain, 7 months pregnant and utterly alone, watching her husband cradle another woman's belly. This was happening in the very same restaurant where he had proposed to her 3 years earlier. He had gotten down on one knee right there, between the dessert case and the hostess stand, and told her she was the only woman he could ever imagine a future with. In 7 months, he had not once touched Vivian's pregnant belly. She had tried to get him to feel the baby kick, but he always brushed her off, saying he was too busy. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "You are going to burn his entire castle to the ground, and then you are coming home to me. We are going to raise my grandbaby with so much love she will never know what it feels like to be cold. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Vivian had whispered. "And sweetheart," her mother had added, "wear the blue dress? The one with the diamonds. Let that man see what a real queen looks like." The night before the gala, Preston stumbled into the house, drunk, around midnight. Vivian was in bed, propped up with pillows since sleeping on her back had become impossible. She was looking through a book of baby names and had just put a circle around the name Eleanor. Preston just stood in the doorway, staring. The look of pure disgust on his face was so intense that Vivian flinched, as if he had physically struck her. "God, Vivian, you look like a whale," he sneered. "I cannot even stand the sight of you anymore." "I am carrying your daughter, Preston. Are you even sure that she is mine?" he shot back. "Let us be realistic, Vivian. I have not come near you in months. Who knows what you get up to all day while I am at work?" The accusation was so unbelievably cruel, so perfectly designed to hurt, that it left her breathless. The man who spent every Tuesday afternoon with his mistress was now accusing his faithful, pregnant wife of being unfaithful. He then sat down on the bed to take off his shoes and said the one thing she had been dreading for months. "After the baby arrives, we need to have a serious talk about our future. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want a different kind of life. The company is making some big moves, and I think I need to restructure my life at home too." He was actually telling her he was planning to leave her the moment the baby was born, as soon as she had served her purpose. "Where would I even go, Preston?" Vivian asked, her voice deliberately small and fragile. "I do not have anything. You are in control of all the money." Preston smirked, his white teeth flashing in the dim bedroom light. "That is right. So maybe you should work on being a little more grateful." He was sound asleep 4 minutes later. Vivian lay awake until the first light of dawn, with her hand resting on her belly, feeling her daughter kicking against her palm. She whispered into the quiet room, "Tomorrow, my love. Tomorrow, Mommy is done pretending." The morning of the big event, Vivian's world tried to collapse at 2:54 a.m. A phone call woke her up, and it was the first of 3 disasters. It was Benedict. He said, "Madam, we have a serious issue." He told her that a board member, whose name he wouldn't say yet, had leaked critical information to a financial reporter. A major newspaper learned that the true owner of the Aurora Group was going to be revealed that night. If that news got out too soon, her husband Preston might get spooked. He could run away or start shredding documents. The second call was from her best friend Ruth. Ruth said, "Viv, I just ran into Tiffany Blake at the nail salon. She was bragging to her friends that Preston is divorcing you on Monday. His lawyer claims you will be left with nothing because you don't have a job." They saw her as a broke housewife and were planning to take her home. Then her lawyer called. He said, Mrs. Carter, a loan for $500,000 was taken out against your house yesterday. The signature on the paperwork was supposed to be hers, but a specialist confirmed it was a forgery. Her husband had faked her name to get the cash. The money was used to buy a condo, and the property was in Tiffany Blake's name. In just 45 minutes, her life was under attack from all sides. Will a woman they all underestimated be able to turn this nightmare into victory? Stick with this story to see the most satisfying revenge you can imagine. The news leak put her entire plan at risk. The grand announcement she had carefully arranged was about to be ruined. The divorce papers proved Preston was already moving to strip her of everything she had. They had absolutely no clue about her real wealth. And the forged signature was a major crime. If that came out the wrong way, it would expose her before she was ready to strike. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed while Preston was in the shower. She could hear him singing some silly pop song about living his best life. His voice, happy and full of confidence, came right through the door. He was getting ready for what he thought was his special night. He did not know that the woman sitting just 15 feet away from him was the actual owner of the water he was washing with. She dialed Benedict's number again. "Stop that story from printing," she commanded. "I do not care what it takes. Offer the journalist an exclusive interview with me after the gala. Do whatever you have to do, but that article cannot come out before I get on that stage." Benedict simply said, "Done?" Vivian then asked, "And the forgery?" She instructed, "Add it to Henderson's file, page 4. She ended the call and then phoned Ruth. She said, "I need you to be there tonight. I need more than just a friend. I need you inside that ballroom at a table in the back close to the exit. If anything goes sideways, I need a person I can trust who is not on my payroll." Ruth answered immediately, "I will be there." She added, "And Viv, whatever happens tonight, I am just so incredibly proud of you." Just then, Preston walked out of the bathroom, surrounded by steam and smelling like expensive cologne. He stood admiring himself in the mirror, adjusting his tuxedo. He practiced his smile, tilting his head to find his most handsome angle. He never even glanced at Vivian. "Vivian," he said, his eyes still fixed on his own image. "Where are my good cufflinks?" "The onyx ones." "They are on the dresser, exactly where you put them," she replied. He snatched them and put them on, then checked the Rolex watch on his wrist. It was a gift from Vivian for their 5th anniversary, but he told everyone he bought it himself with a work bonus. "I will be home very late," he announced. "Do not bother waiting up for me, and make sure the cleaning lady actually dusts the library this time. I found a fingerprint on my desk." He grabbed his coat and left. He did not say goodbye. He did not look in her direction. And he never once looked at her belly, where his own daughter was growing. The front door slammed shut so hard that the picture frames on the wall rattled. The silence that came after was thick and heavy, like the feeling of a ship slowly sinking into the sea. Vivian stood up. She untied the apron she was wearing and let it fall to the floor. She pulled the simple tie from her hair, and her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders. She walked to a locked door at the far end of the hallway. It was a room Preston believed was only used for old storage. She punched in a security code, and the lock clicked open. The room was not for storage at all. It was a high-tech command center. 3 computer monitors glowed with financial data that updated every second. A secure phone line sat on the desk. One entire wall was covered with neatly organized files. And in the very center of the room, hanging on a special form and protected by a garment bag, was the dress. It was made from silk the color of a midnight sky. It had been sewn by hand with thousands of tiny, crushed diamonds that glittered softly in the low light. The dress was designed perfectly to fit her pregnant shape. It draped around her like flowing water, making her look not just pregnant, but powerful. She looked like an approaching storm. Beside the dress sat a jewelry box. Inside lay the Sinclair blue, a breathtaking necklace made with a massive sapphire and surrounded by diamonds. It had been passed down in her family for 3 generations. The necklace was worth an astonishing $12 million. Her father had always kept it locked away in a bank vault. He had once told Vivian, "You will know the right time to wear this." He said, "Wear it on the day you are ready to stop letting people make you feel small." She gently touched the sapphire, and it felt cool against her skin. "I am done being small," she whispered to the empty room. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her grandmother, Gloria, along with a photo. Gloria was standing in her kitchen back in Ohio. She was holding up a big, heavy iron skillet and smiling broadly. The message read, "Just in case that boy decides to show up uninvited, Grandma is armed and ready." For the first time in what felt like forever, Vivian actually laughed. Ruth arrived at 4 o'clock that afternoon. She carried a garment bag, a professional makeup kit borrowed from a friend who worked in theater, and 2 bottles of sparkling cider. Ruth explained, "I wanted to bring champagne to celebrate, but you are pregnant and I have to drive. So cider is what we get. We can still toast to your husband's complete and utter ruin like proper ladies." She helped Vivian put her hair up in an elegant style that perfectly showed off her neck for the Sinclair blue. When Vivian opened the jewelry box, Ruth stopped breathing for a second. "Girl," she whispered, "is that thing real?" Vivian smiled. "It is called the Sinclair blue. It has been in my family since 1942, Vivian explained. Ruth just stared at the brilliant diamonds. "I have been spotting you $20 for lunch," Ruth said in disbelief. $20, Vivian, for the last 5 years. You owe me for 5 years of emotional damages, plus a down payment on a vacation house. Vivian laughed again, and this time it was a genuine, warm laugh. It felt unfamiliar, like a friend she had not seen in a very long time. "But for real," Ruth said, "can I just hold it for a second? I want to know what it feels like to be rich." Vivian handed her the necklace. Ruth held it up to the light, closed her eyes, and stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds. Then she opened them and sighed. "Nope. I still have student loans. It did not work." Vivian then made a video call to Gloria. She slowly turned around in front of the phone's camera so her grandmother could see her entire outfit. The midnight blue dress flowed beautifully over her pregnant figure. The tiny diamonds sparkled like stars. The deep blue sapphire glowed at her throat. Gloria was quiet for a long moment. When she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Oh, my sweet baby girl. If your father could only see you right now, he would be weeping with pride." Vivian admitted, "I am scared, Grandma." Gloria's voice became firm. "Good." "Brave people are always scared," her grandmother told her. "It is the cowards who do not feel a thing. Now you go put on those diamonds and show that man exactly what a fool he has been," she added. "And you call me the very second it is all over. I do not care how late it is. This old woman is not sleeping a wink tonight." While Vivian prepared herself for the biggest night of her life, Preston was already at the Archdale Hotel in Manhattan, happily digging his own grave. He arrived at 6:30 with Tiffany hanging on his arm. She was wearing a flashy red dress, a cheap imitation of a designer gown that he had charged to his company's expense account. Her new necklace, which had been paid for with money donated to an orphanage and disguised as a computer purchase, glittered around her neck. Preston walked into the lobby as if he owned the place. A large security guard with an earpiece looked down at his tablet to check the guest list. He found Preston's name and paused. A strange expression crossed the guard's face. It almost looked like pity. "This way, Mr. Carter," he said. "Your table is near the front." Preston grinned at Tiffany. "See? Near the front. That is what power gets you, babe." The ballroom was like a palace. Giant crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like sparkling cars. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd. The city's most powerful people were gathered in small groups, their laughter low and their jewelry bright. Preston scanned the room, desperate for someone important to notice him. He spotted Grant Holloway, another investor who had outsmarted him on a business deal a few months earlier. Grant was talking with some older men in expensive suits. "Grant, great to see you," Preston said, pushing his way into their circle with all the grace of a ringing fire alarm. Grant turned around. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Preston, and then at Tiffany, who stood out like a bright red traffic light. "Preston," Grant said, "I'm surprised to see you here. This is a private, invitation-only event." "I have my connections," Preston lied smoothly. "This is Tiffany." Grant gave her a cold nod and said, "A pleasure," without really looking at her. He then said, "We were just discussing the Aurora Group. Word is the owner is finally making an appearance tonight." Preston let out a loud laugh. "The Aurora Group? Seriously? It is probably just some old guy in a wheelchair hiding his money in Switzerland. I heard the whole company is just a way to clean dirty money. A man with silver hair who was part of the group slowly turned his head to stare directly at Preston. His name was Lord Rothschild, one of the 5 wealthiest men in all of Europe. He was giving Preston a look you might give a bug right before you squash it. "I would be extremely careful with your assumptions, young man," Grant said calmly. "The Aurora Group does not just own this hotel. They likely own the bank that holds your company's loans." Preston just waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying gnat. "I know how finance works, sir. I can recognize a shell company when I see one. Aurora has no public leadership, which means it has no real power." Grant just smiled and took a sip of his champagne. "If you say so, Preston. On another note, where's your lovely wife tonight? Vivian, was it?" Preston rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, Vivian is at home. She is not really cut out for this kind of high-powered world. She is a sweet girl, but very simple. Her idea of a fancy night out is a bottle of wine from the grocery store. I am sure you know the type." Tiffany, sitting beside him, giggled. "She sounds adorable, like a little country mouse." "Exactly," Preston agreed, taking a new glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "A mouse, but in my world, I need a lioness." He pulled Tiffany a little closer and laughed at his own joke. He had no idea that the quiet little mouse he left at home was on her way to the ballroom, and she was about to eat him alive. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights in the grand room went down. The gentle buzz from 500 different conversations stopped completely, like a flame being snuffed out. One single spotlight landed on the huge staircase at the other end of the room. The light made the marble stairs gleam like a road to the heavens. Or maybe it was a road to hell, all depending on who you were. The host for the evening walked up to the microphone. He was a well-known actor with a voice as smooth as fine bourbon. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at the 50th Annual Diamond Gala. This evening is a truly special one. For a long time, the Aurora Group has worked quietly in the background, giving money to hospitals, charities, and the arts. But tonight, the chairwoman has decided to show herself." Preston gave Tiffany a little nudge. "Get ready, this will be some ancient old lady. I will bet you $10. The announcer's powerful voice filled the room again. "Please join me in welcoming the owner and chairwoman of the Aurora Group, Madame Vivian Sinclair." The glass of champagne slipped from Preston's fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. The noise was swallowed by a single, sharp gasp that moved through the crowd. Sinclair. That was Vivian's name before they were married, but that just was not possible. Her father was only a mechanic. Preston had met the man before he died. He could still remember the dark grease stained under his fingernails. He remembered eating barbecue in the man's small backyard. The big double doors at the very top of the staircase swung open. And there stood Vivian. She was at the highest point of the stairs, dressed in a gown the color of deep midnight blue silk. The dress flowed down over her pregnant belly like a twilight waterfall. Tiny crushed diamonds on the fabric caught the spotlight and scattered it into 1,000 glittering pieces. She looked like she was glowing with a light from another world. The Sinclair blue sapphire hung at her throat, a $12 million stone that seemed to pulse with power. Her dark hair was styled up, revealing the lovely curve of her neck. Even at 7 months pregnant, she was the most powerful woman in the room. She began to walk down the stairs. The click of her heels on the marble was slow and deliberate with each step. She moved with the certainty of a woman who owned the very floor she walked on, which, in this case, was true. The crowd made a path for her. 500 of New York City's richest and most influential people stepped aside as if she were parting the Red Sea. Vivian walked straight through them, her eyes fixed forward. Her eyes were locked onto a single person. Preston. He was stuck at his table, his mouth wide open. His face cycled through different feelings so fast he looked like a confused slot machine. Tiffany suddenly realized what was happening and grabbed his arm in a panic. "Why does that woman look exactly like your wife, but like some kind of famous supermodel?" Grant Holloway was standing close by and heard her. A small, satisfied smile appeared on his face. "I do believe, Preston, that is the little mouse you said you left at home." Vivian got to the bottom of the stairs and stopped about 10 feet away from Preston. 4 security guards stood around her like a human wall. Benedict Ashford stood to her right, looking flawless in a dark gray suit. To her left was Marcus Henderson, the financial investigator, holding a leather folder like it contained a death warrant. Vivian's eyes met Preston's, and a slow, cold smile spread across her face. There was no kindness in it, and no forgiveness. It was the smile of a woman who would never be taken for granted again. Someone gave her a microphone. Her voice rang out through the large ballroom, strong and clear. "Hello, everyone. I am sorry that I am late. I had to get rid of some garbage before I could come." Her eyes never left Preston. She then turned to Lord Rothschild. "Lord Rothschild, I apologize for any mix-up with the Shanghai deal. Benedict informs me that all the documents are in order now." The older lord bowed his head respectfully. "Please do not mention it, Madam Sinclair. Your plan for the Asian market is brilliant. It is our honor to follow your lead." Preston could only watch as one of the richest men in Europe bowed to the woman he believed was just his simple housewife. Deep inside him, something began to shatter. Vivian returned to the speaker's stand. Her face was a picture of calm, but her friend Ruth could see from the back of the room that her hands were trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian started, "for the past 5 years I have been conducting a sort of social experiment. I wanted to learn if a man could love a woman for who she truly is, and not for what she owns. So I concealed my true identity. I pretended to be a simple wife and mother. I allowed my husband to be in charge." She pressed a button. The huge screen behind her lit up with a company diagram. The Aurora Group was at the very top. Below it was a complex network of smaller, fake companies. At the very, very bottom, holding on like a leech, was Carter Ventures. My husband Preston believed he was a successful man who built his own business. The reality is, every single dollar in his company came from me. It was all sent through these other companies. I was his only investor, his only client, and his only source of income. Preston jumped to his feet. "That is not true. I made that deal in Tokyo last month. That was $2 million of real money from real clients." Vivian calmly pressed the button one more time. A bank record filled the giant screen. It proved the Tokyo deal was funded by Orion Acquisitions, which was one of her companies. "You were in a meeting with my own lawyers, Preston. I paid actors to sit at the table with you. You were so busy showing off your expensive watch that you never noticed that they could not even speak English." The screen changed once more, displaying hotel bills from the St. Regis for every Tuesday afternoon. It showed a receipt for a Cartier necklace, which was hidden as an expense for computer parts. Then, a photograph of Preston and Tiffany at Disney World appeared, both wearing Mickey Mouse ears. That trip had been listed as a business trip to Chicago. Vivian let the Disney picture stay on the screen. The room erupted in laughter, but it was not a kind sound. It was the harsh sound of high society kicking someone out. Henderson came forward holding a pile of faked documents. "And this," Henderson said to the crowd, "is a loan for $500,000 against their home, which was taken out yesterday." "He used a fake signature," Henderson went on. "The money was for a condominium in Stamford, Connecticut, which is now in the name of Miss Tiffany Blake." Henderson then looked directly at Tiffany. "That necklace you are wearing, Miss Blake? It was purchased with a company card for a charity that was supposed to be feeding orphans in Sudan. You are currently wearing the food budget for an entire village." Tiffany's hands flew to the costly piece of jewelry. She fumbled with the clasp, frantically trying to tear it from her neck. "Get it away from me! Get it off! He told me he was rich. He swore to me that he made his own money." "Oh, he is a self-made man," Vivian said with a cool voice. "He made himself into a criminal." For the final, devastating blow, Henderson held up an old, yellowed birth certificate. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man you know as Preston Carter was actually born Preston Allen Mallory in Trenton, New Jersey. He legally changed his name 4 years ago. Before that, he was a junior manager at a car rental agency, where he was fired for renting cars to himself for weekend trips. The shame was total. The man with the borrowed clothes, the borrowed name, and the borrowed life had no place left to go. Federal agents quietly entered the room from the side doors. "Preston Allen Mallory, the main agent said in a loud voice. "You are under arrest for several charges of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement." As they cuffed his hands behind his back, Preston shouted across the ballroom, "I loved you, Vivian. In my own way, I honestly did love you." Vivian did not shout back. She simply reached up and unhooked the stunning Sinclair blue diamond from her neck. She held the enormous sapphire up so everyone could see it sparkle in the light. "You did not love me, Preston. You loved the image of yourself that you saw in my money. But that mirror is now broken." The agents dragged him toward the exit. The massive wooden doors slammed closed, cutting off his desperate shouts. The entire ballroom broke into applause. Vivian held up a plain glass of water. "To the future. May it be honest, may it be bright, and may it be ours." For the next 48 hours, Vivian Sinclair was the most famous woman in the entire country. The video from the gala spread like wildfire online. Every news station ran the story. Billionaire wife exposes her fake husband at charity event. The clips of Preston's face crumbling as he realized his entire world was a lie were watched 200 million times in only 2 days. The picture of him wearing the Mickey Mouse ears became a famous internet meme. People started selling t-shirts with his face on them. Someone even turned Henderson's financial report into a rap song that went to the top of the comedy music charts. Vivian was finally back home in Greenwich. She was sitting on her couch with her feet up. She had an ice pack on her swollen ankles and was watching the news with Ruth. For the first time in 5 long years, the house felt calm and quiet. It was not the stressful quiet of words not spoken, but the peaceful quiet of true freedom. Ruth handed her a warm cup of herbal tea. "You did it, Viv. It is all over now. You really did it." Vivian gently placed a hand on her pregnant stomach. The baby gave a kick, strong and steady, almost like it was clapping for her too. "Yes," she said with a soft voice. "I suppose I did." At that moment, Ruth's phone chimed. She glanced down at it, and her warm smile vanished. All the color left her face. Ruth's voice was an urgent whisper. "Viv, you need to look at this." It was a video that had been posted from the county jail. The clip showed Tiffany Blake in a bright orange jumpsuit with dark streaks of mascara running down her face. Another inmate was secretly filming her on a hidden phone. It did not matter if her tears were real or just for show. The effect was devastating. "She ruined my life," Tiffany sobbed for the camera. "I am pregnant, and I am completely alone. Preston warned me she was cruel. He told me they were getting a divorce. He even showed me the paperwork. And now I am sitting in jail, all because a billionaire wanted to settle a score." Her voice broke with emotion. She is not a hero. She is just a rich woman who played games with people's lives for 5 years. She could have left him at any point. Instead, she decided to stand by and watch us all suffer just so she could have her big, dramatic finale. What about my baby? Does my baby not deserve a chance to live? The video received 14 million views in only 6 hours. The entire public narrative flipped in a heartbeat. Suddenly, the hero was being painted as the villain. The headlines shifted with a speed and cruelty that can only be found on the internet. "Billionaire revenge or billionaire bully?" one read. Another asked, "Pregnant mistress says she is the true victim." A third one questioned, "Did Vivian Sinclair take it too far?" Television talk shows began to debate her actions. One commentator asked, "She is worth $4 billion. She funded his entire fake life. Are we sure she was not the one who was really controlling everything?" A well-known writer published an article titled, "The Problem with Billionaire Justice." The piece argued that Vivian had used real people as if they were pawns in a chess game, all for her own personal satisfaction. The comments online were absolutely brutal. One said, "She could have simply divorced him. Instead, she chose to destroy him in front of 500 people. That is not justice, that is a power move." Then came the comment that stung the most. What kind of mother would use her own pregnancy as a weapon for a public shaming? Vivian sat on her bed with her hand on her stomach, scrolling through the hateful words. She watched as the perfect world she thought she had finally won back started to crumble all over again. Ruth finally had to take the phone away from her. "Viv, please stop. These people do not have a clue who you are. They do not know what he made you endure. But they have a point, Ruth. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper, quieter than it had ever been, even when Preston used to scream at her. I did arrange this whole thing. I could have left 5 years ago. What kind of person remains in a terrible situation just to build a more perfect trap? The kind of person who was in love, Ruth replied gently, and who held on to the hope that he would become a better man. That is not a sign of weakness, Vivian. That is just being human. Then Gloria called from Ohio, and her voice was a welcome dose of common sense. Baby girl, since when do we care what a group of strangers on the internet has to say about us? You know what is in your own heart. God knows your heart, and that baby in your belly knows your heart. Everyone else can go kick rocks. Then she spoke the words that Vivian desperately needed to hear. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. When you are fighting a monster, everybody cheers for you. But the moment you win, they start to whisper that maybe you fought a little too dirty. Do not you dare feel sorry for having survived. Women have been told to apologize for their own strength since the beginning of time. That nonsense ends with you. Vivian wiped the tears from her eyes. Okay, Grandma. But the storm of negative publicity was not the real threat. The true danger arrived 30 minutes later with a phone call from Benedict. He used a tone of voice she'd only ever heard during a genuine crisis. Madam, I am going to need you to sit down. Preston's new lawyer, a man by the name of Harlan Drake, has just filed 3 emergency motions. First, he is claiming entrapment. He is going to argue that you intentionally paid for Preston's illegal acts just to trap him, which could make you a co-conspirator. Second, he has filed for custody. Preston is demanding full custody of your unborn child, claiming you are psychologically unfit to be a mother, and that you used your pregnancy as a weapon in a public spectacle. Third, he is filing a countersuit for $50 million. He claims you tricked him into marriage by hiding who you really were. Vivian felt all the blood drain from her face. He wants custody of Eleanor. A family court judge scheduled a temporary hearing for next week. If Drake can prove you planned the criminal activity, the federal charges could be lessened. More importantly, he could build a case to take your child. The world started to spin. Vivian grabbed the side of the bed to keep herself steady. The baby kicked inside her, a hard and sudden movement, as if she could sense her mother's terror. He cannot take my daughter, Benedict. He cannot. He will not, Benedict said, his voice firm. But we have to be ready. This is not about revenge anymore, madam. This is about survival. For the next 3 days, Vivian went to what Ruth would later call the dark place. She barely ate. She could not sleep. She just sat in the nursery, the one she'd been secretly putting together for months. It had soft yellow walls, a white crib, and a stuffed elephant she bought impulsively at a farmer's market. It reminded her of an elephant her own father had given her when she was a little girl. She rocked back and forth in the chair, holding her belly and whispering to her daughter. I was supposed to keep you safe. I was supposed to be smarter than this. And now he could take you away from me, all because I was too proud to just let it go. I am so sorry, baby. I am so sorry. Ruth found her like that on the 3rd morning. She sat down on the floor, her back against the crib, and just stayed with her in the silence. After a long time, she finally said, Stop. Vivian looked up at her. Stop it, right now, Ruth insisted. You are not losing this baby, not over my dead body, not over Gloria's dead body, and not over Benedict Ashford's very proper, very British dead body. It is not going to happen. So stop grieving for something you have not lost and start fighting. What evidence do we actually have? Vivian stared at her friend. Then something inside her eyes changed. It was not the cold, calculating look from the Gala. It was something warmer, more desperate. It was the fire of a mother protecting her child. She picked up the encrypted phone and called Benedict. Emergency meeting, the full team. In 1 hour. The team gathered on a secure video call. Benedict was in London. Henderson was in his plain office in Midtown. Vivian's legal team was in their conference room, and Detective Sarah Crawford from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division joined them. She had been working on Vivian's case for 18 months. The entrapment claim, Vivian began, her voice suddenly strong. It falls apart if we can prove I was working with the police the entire time. Benedict, I need the email history with the FBI collected and filed with the court. Every single message, every report, every timestamp. Benedict nodded. It is already in motion, madam. We have 147 documented communications with the Bureau, going back 18 months. You are not helping with criminal activity, you are building a federal case with their guidance. Detective Crawford spoke next. I can confirm that in court. Mrs. Carter, or rather Mrs. Sinclair, was a cooperating witness. She came to us a year and a half ago with proof of financial problems in her husband's company. Our team advised her to continue watching him as we prepared the legal case. Every action she took had been authorized as a necessary part of our investigation. Vivian then turned to the next challenge, saying, Now about the custody hearing, what will we need to win that? Her attorney replied, We need a strong character witness, someone who can tell the court about your qualities as a mother and explain the reasons you had to conceal your true identity. We need a person the judge will trust completely. Vivian considered this for a moment, and then, for the first time in 3 long days, a smile spread across her face. Book a flight for my grandmother, she said. The hearing took place the next Thursday at a family court in Stamford, Connecticut. The courtroom was packed to the gills. Reporters filled the corridor outside. Preston was shown on a video monitor from the jail wearing his beige inmate uniform, while his attorney, Harlan Drake, did all the speaking. Vivian had to give him credit. Drake was good at his job. He was a tough man with silver hair who spoke in a measured, sensible tone, making his outrageous claims sound almost plausible. Your Honor, Drake began, even if we accept that Mrs. Carter was working with law enforcement, it does not change the central issue here. She maintained a false identity throughout her entire marriage. She deliberately deceived her husband about her real self. This represents a profound level of psychological manipulation. A woman capable of misleading a man so completely for 5 years is not a suitable parent. Vivian's lawyer, a woman by the name of Patricia Webb, rose to her feet. Your Honor, we wish to call a character witness, Gloria Sinclair, who is the petitioner's grandmother. Gloria walked into that courtroom like she owned the entire building. She was 78 years old and moved cautiously with a cane. She had on a floral dress and her best hat for Sunday services. She resembled a grandmother from an iconic American painting, the sort of grandmother everyone in the courtroom secretly wished was theirs. She swore the oath and sat down in the witness chair, appearing as relaxed as a woman who had faced far greater challenges than a legal proceeding. Drake approached her. Mrs. Sinclair, isn't it correct that your granddaughter knowingly lied to her husband about her financial status for the duration of their marriage? Gloria gave him a look you might give a child who had just left muddy footprints across a freshly cleaned floor. Young man, she said, my granddaughter had to watch her first fiancé take $2 million from her and flee to Costa Rica. She saw every man she ever went out with become obsessed with her money as soon as they learned she was wealthy. One of those men stole from her. Another sold her personal details to a tabloid magazine. A third man proposed to her after only 2 weeks and was already asking for a joint bank account before the engagement ring was settled on her finger. Gloria leaned in, her voice ringing with clarity. So yes, she concealed who she was. She did it because she hoped to find just one man, only one, who would love the woman inside, not the balance in her bank account. That is not deceit, counselor. That is called self-protection. And if you are unable to understand that distinction, I truly pity your wife. A quiet ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her middle years named Judge Harrison, pursed her lips, fighting to keep from smiling. Drake tried to press his point. But the amount of time, Mrs. Sinclair, 5 years of dishonesty. Gloria just tilted her head. 5 years of making that man's dinner. 5 years of doing his laundry. 5 years of being called foolish and unattractive while she carried his child. 5 years of seeing him spend her own money on another woman. And you have the nerve to lecture me about deception? My granddaughter is not the one who was deceptive in this marriage, counselor. She is the one who was fooled by the man she thought she married, Judge Harrison announced her ruling 40 minutes later. The request for custody is denied. This court has seen no evidence that Mrs. Sinclair Carter is an unfit mother. The countersuit is permanently dismissed. The claim of entrapment is without merit, considering the documented cooperation with federal authorities. Additionally, the court acknowledges that the respondent, Mr. Mallory, is currently facing federal charges that involve forging his wife's signature on a loan document. The court finds his assertions of being a victim extremely difficult to accept. In the hallway afterward, Vivian embraced Ruth with such force that they nearly tumbled over. Gloria gently patted her on the back and declared, "Now can we please find a place to eat lunch? Pursuing justice really works up an appetite." That night, Vivian slept for a full 12 hours without waking once. It was the most restful sleep she had experienced in many years. She had a dream about her father. He was in his workshop, bent over an engine, and he glanced up and smiled right at her. "You did well, Vivi. Now go and get some rest." She woke up feeling lighter than she had in 5 long years. The danger to her custody was over. The government's case against Preston was ironclad. The narrative in the news was shifting once more as additional details of his mistreatment came to light. Ruth was spending the night. Gloria had made the trip from Ohio and was now comfortable in the guest room, with her cast iron skillet placed on the nightstand because, as she explained, you just never can be too careful. By 10 at night, the house was quiet and calm. Ruth was fast asleep in her room down the hall. Gloria was snoring softly in the room across from her. Vivian was propped up in bed with one hand resting on her stomach, reading a book on sleep schedules for newborns. The entire concept felt incredibly optimistic, given that she had not slept soundly since the 1990s. At 3 in the morning, a sound startled her awake. It was faint. A door shutting somewhere on the first floor. The quiet shuffle of shoes on the hardwood. The distinct creak of the third step on the stairs. The one she always intended to have repaired. There was an intruder in her house. Vivian's hand instinctively went to her phone on the bedside table. Her other hand moved to cover her belly. The baby shifted inside her, then grew quiet, almost as if it were listening. She dialed the security company. The call went through, but she heard no ringing. The line was completely silent. It had been cut. Whoever was in her home had disabled the phones. She snatched the secure, encrypted phone and quickly typed a text to Ruth. "Someone is downstairs. Call 911. Stay in your room." And then she heard his voice. Vivian. It was unmistakably Preston. She would recognize that voice in the middle of a hurricane. But it was different now. It was no longer smooth and controlled. It was rough, broken, and utterly unstable. She could hear him moving about downstairs, walking through the living room and into the kitchen. Then the sound of his footsteps ceased. She heard the beeping tones of the keypad for the secret room. An incorrect code was entered. Then another wrong code. This was followed by the thud of something heavy crashing against the door, a shoulder slamming into it with all the force of a desperate man. The door splintered and flew open. Vivian heard him enter the room. She could hear the exact moment he laid eyes on the monitors, the documents, the entire wall of proof. She heard a sound that was a strange mix of a laugh and a sob. Then she heard his footsteps on the stairs. They were slow and heavy, and they were coming closer. He materialized in the doorway of her bedroom. His eyes looked frantic, and his hair was a disheveled mess. He smelled strongly of bourbon. He had on a rumpled shirt and jeans, likely the same outfit he was wearing before. His lawyer must have used his influence to get him released on bail. 5 years, Preston said, his voice trembling. For 5 years you observed me like I was a rat in a science experiment. You knew it all. You knew about every single meeting, every business trip, every lie. You just sat there in your little apron, and you watched me. Preston, you need to leave. You are violating the terms of your bail. The police have been called and are on their way. You are the one who made me this way, he snarled. His hands were balled into tight fists. I was a decent man before I met you. You are the one who turned me into a monster. You dangled all that money in front of me, and then you condemned me for wanting it. This is all on you, Vivian. Every last bit of it. He advanced 1 step into the room. Vivian scrambled backward against the headboard. Her hand was pressed against her stomach. Eleanor delivered a swift, hard kick, as if she were trying to push the threat away. I am going to give you one chance, Preston. Turn around and walk out of that door. Go back to your lawyer. This situation does not need to become any worse. Worse? Preston let out a hollow, hideous laugh. How could it possibly get any worse? You have destroyed my reputation. You have taken my company. You have taken away my freedom. You have made me a laughingstock in front of the whole world. What more is there to lose?" From the hallway, a voice cut through the tension, sharp and steady. "Your dignity, son, but you surrendered that a very long time ago." Gloria Sinclair was standing in the doorway. She was a 78-year-old woman, standing only 5 feet 2 inches tall, and she was dressed in a simple bathrobe decorated with pink flowers. In her right hand, she gripped a 12-inch cast-iron skillet, holding it at shoulder level. She held it with the natural ease of a woman who had been expertly wielding heavy kitchenware since before Preston was even a thought in this world. "I am 78 years old," Gloria announced as she stepped into the bedroom. "I have buried 2 husbands. I lived through the Jim Crow South. I have recovered from a hip replacement. I survived the pain of watching my own son pass away in my arms. Do you truly believe for 1 second that I am afraid of you?" Preston just stared at the small, elderly woman holding the frying pan. For a brief moment, the fury in his eyes was replaced by something else, maybe confusion, or even a hint of shame. "Sit down," Gloria commanded. Preston did not sit, but he did take 1 step back, and that was all she needed. Ruth suddenly appeared behind Gloria, a phone held tightly to her ear. "Preston, I have 911 on the line. The police are 4 minutes away. You have exactly 240 seconds to decide if you want to add breaking and entering to your list of federal crimes." Those 4 minutes felt like 4 years. Preston just stood in the hallway breathing heavily. His fists kept clenching and unclenching as he stared at Vivian through the open bedroom door. She stared right back, one hand on her belly, refusing to show any fear. The sirens were the first thing they heard, followed by flashing lights. Red and blue strobed through the windows, mimicking a frantic heartbeat. The police entered through the front door, first 2 officers, then 2 more. They found Preston in the hallway in the exact same spot where he had stopped when Gloria told him to. He offered no resistance. All the fight seemed to have drained out of him, leaving behind an empty, defeated shell. As they put him in handcuffs and led him down the stairs, he turned his head for one final look. "This is not over, Vivian. I will take everything from you. I will even take the baby. You will never be rid of me." The door shut, the sirens faded into the distance, and the house fell silent. Dot model. Vivian slid her back down the headboard, collapsing onto the mattress. She pulled her knees up as far as her pregnant belly would let her. Her whole body was shaking. Ruth gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. Gloria sat on the edge of the bed and rested a weathered hand on Vivian's knee. "It is okay now, baby. He cannot hurt you anymore." Vivian's voice was a faint whisper. "What if he is right? What if I am the one who made him like this?" Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then she gave Vivian's knee a gentle squeeze and spoke with the solid confidence of a woman who knew the truth. "Vivian Marie, a woman does not make a man cruel. A cruel man just waits until he is comfortable enough to show you who he really is. You did not create a monster, baby. You just gave him a nicer cage." She named her Eleanor Ruth Carter Sinclair. Eleanor was for Eleanor Roosevelt because Vivian wanted her daughter to be named after a woman who turned her pain into power. Ruth was for the friend who stayed by her side when everyone else was happy to just watch from a distance. Gloria was right there in the delivery room. This was not exactly allowed, but Gloria simply walked in, took a chair, and not a single person on the hospital staff had the courage to ask the 78-year-old grandmother with a cane to leave. Ruth held Vivian's hand the whole time. At one point, during a really painful contraction, Vivian squeezed so hard that Ruth yelled, "Viv, I need that hand for my job. I am a nurse. I have to use needles." When Eleanor finally made her entrance, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Gloria started to cry. Ruth started to cry. Vivian started to cry. Even Benedict, who was on a video call from London at 2 a.m. his time, took off his glasses and dabbed his eyes with a fancy handkerchief. "She is perfect, madam," Benedict said. "Absolutely perfect." "Of course she is," Gloria said through her tears. She held the baby like a natural, like a woman who had been holding babies her entire life. She is a Sinclair. The weeks that followed were the calmest of Vivian's entire life. She was staying at Gloria's house in Dayton, The very same house her own father grew up in. It was the same porch where her father, Henry, used to sit on summer evenings carving little wooden animals for her when she was a girl. The dogwood trees were covered in blossoms. The yard smelled like freshly cut grass and a brand new start. Eleanor slept in a little bassinet right beside Vivian's bed. She made those soft, contented sounds that newborns make when they feel completely and totally safe. It is the only sound in the world that can make a woman who has been through hell believe that maybe, just maybe, everything will be all right. Ruth came over on a Saturday in May. She brought diapers, a casserole, and a bottle of sparkling cider because, as she said, we still need to make a proper toast. They sat together on Gloria's porch. Eleanor was asleep on Vivian's chest, her tiny fist wrapped tightly around a lock of her mother's hair. The afternoon sun bathed everything in a warm, golden light that made the whole world look like a painting. "Okay," Ruth said, pouring the cider into two mismatched glasses from Gloria's kitchen. "Tell me everything that has been going on. I need all the details." Vivian took a sip. Preston was sentenced last month. He received 8 years in a federal prison. For 5 years, Preston had made Vivian believe she was small and worthless. He was an expert at it. Her neighbors could hear his shouting through the thin walls of their home. The servers at the local diner watched her come to work, morning after morning, trying to cover her red, puffy eyes. He had slowly chipped away at her spirit until she was almost gone. She had turned into a woman who stayed too long with a man who treated her like she was nothing. But even the tiniest spark can light a fire, and he never realized she still had one left inside her. This is the story of how that woman, Vivian Sinclair, did not just survive the most terrible kind of betrayal, but also found her way back to the person she was always supposed to be. She did not just leave, she built an entire empire from the wreckage of her life. If her story of finding strength in the worst of times resonates with you, please give this story a like. It really helps it get to someone else who might need to know they are not alone. And let me know in the comments, do you think getting public revenge was the best choice, or should she have just disappeared quietly? I would love to know your thoughts. Her plan was simple, but it was also the most difficult thing she had ever attempted. She put together a huge gala, a night where everyone would be watching. For months, she imagined that single, perfect moment of truth. She pictured the pure satisfaction of watching Preston's entire world fall apart around him. And when that moment finally came, it was real, and it was stunning. She saw the mask of perfection finally slip from his face. She watched as every person in that room saw him for the monster he really was. The story everyone believed finally changed, and at last, they saw the truth. After that night, there was no way out for him. His lawyer attempted to make a deal, but the judge showed no mercy. Preston was denied any possibility of parole for 5 years. A bail violation tacked on another 18 months to his sentence. As for their business, Carter Ventures was completely shut down. Every single asset was transferred back to Vivian's company, Aurora. Benedict, her loyal advisor, managed the whole process. The Carter name was wiped clean from everything, erased, as if it had never been there in the first place. One afternoon, her friend Ruth mentioned that Tiffany, a woman involved in the scandal, had her baby. It was a boy she had named James. Tiffany had taken a plea deal for 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. "And how do you feel about all that?" Ruth asked gently. Vivian quietly watched a small bird hop across the lawn. After a moment, she said, "I created an anonymous trust fund for her son." Ruth just stared, completely stunned. Vivian explained, "That little boy did not get to choose his parents, Ruth. He deserves a chance to be more than just the result of their bad choices." But Vivian discovered something that no one ever tells you about getting justice. It does not feel the way you think it will. The satisfaction from her revenge disappeared in a matter of hours. It was replaced by a deep tiredness, sadness, and the difficult, messy job of rebuilding a life that was built on a lie. What really healed her was something much quieter. It was sitting on a porch in Ohio with her best friend, her grandmother, and her new baby Eleanor. It was listening to the birds sing and feeling the sun on her skin, while being completely loved by the people who mattered most. 6 months later, Vivian stood on a small stage at a community center in Dayton, Ohio. The room was full of real women, survivors just like her. She looked out at their faces and took a deep breath. "I am not here today as a billionaire," she said. "I am here as a woman who stayed too long." She explained that even with all of her money and connections, leaving was the hardest thing she ever had to do. "And that is why this foundation now exists," she announced. It would offer free legal services, safe housing, job training, and childcare, making sure that when a woman walks away, she is walking toward a real future. As she came down from the stage, her daughter Eleanor reached up for her. Vivian scooped the little girl into a big hug. Her grandmother Gloria rolled up in her wheelchair beside them. "Baby girl," Gloria said, her voice filled with pride, "your daddy would be so proud of the woman you are today." Just then, Vivian's phone buzzed. It was a text message from Benedict, her advisor in London. It said, "The Paris acquisition is complete. The board sends its congratulations. Also, your grandmother called me and asked for British tea biscuits, the ones with chocolate." "Should I proceed?" Vivian smiled and typed her reply. "Proceed immediately. Do not make her wait. She has a skillet." Vivian carried Eleanor out into the bright October sunshine, her family right beside her. She had lost herself completely inside a lie, but she had found her way home. She was not a victim, and she was not a villain. She was a mother, a daughter, and a friend. She was a woman who finally understood that she deserved better. And she was 100% right. Thank you for staying with our story until the very end. It was made by our team as a reminder that no one ever deserves to be treated as less than they are. We look forward to seeing you again for our next story.